Joining the Free Time Mastermind podcast. I am your host, Robert Gaines, and today we've got Wes Towers with us. How you doing, Wes? I appreciate you coming in.
Fantastic. Good to connect from the other side of the planet. People can probably realize I have an accent here from Australia. So there you go.
That's right. Well, in the US, we love the Australian accent. I don't know. Do you guys feel the same way about the American accent, or because I mean, we have a
Yeah, for
bunch.
sure.
Go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, well, we hear it so much because we watch the television shows that are from there and so on, movies, etc. So we're heavily influenced. It's kind of funny. I do so many of these calls with people in the States and other parts of the world. And when I have another Aussie on a show, that's kind of strange to me. It's like, hey, in that forum and context, it seems weird to talk to an Aussie in these kind of podcasts. So yeah, there you go.
I've said before on other podcasts that I neutralize my accent. I actually have a pretty heavy what we would call country accent in the U.S. And the only time it comes out is if I'm talking to somebody else. So I'm sure your Australian
Yeah,
accent gets a little thicker when you've got somebody from home on there. I wanted
yeah,
to ask you
probably.
that. How much of your clientele at uplift360.com.au are you servicing? How much of the U.S. market is it? Primarily Australians, or I'm sure you're doing quite a bit of
Yeah.
business in the U.S. as well.
There's global clients for sure. I should do the stats on it. As a gut feel, it's probably 80% Aussies, something like that. Yeah, so it just happens that way because you get known and recognized around the traps. So
Sure.
yeah, but certainly we've got some good clients everywhere.
What adjustments do you have to make, Wes, the locals versus, let's say, somebody in the U.S.? Because I know I know there's cultural differences. So do you have to adjust?
Yeah.
Like I know Americans are we're famous for being impatient. Is that you'd experience that as well?
No, I think it's just different terminology. We kind of touched on it before the show. Aussies tend to have nicknames and so on for everything, and we work with a lot of trades and construction, and home services type businesses. So we call them tradies, and electricians we call them sparkies, and there's a whole bunch of other phrases that we just use, and sometimes I forget who I'm talking to and what the right terminology might be. But people kind of appreciate it. They kind of think we're funny down here in Australia, and and it works okay.
And it's pretty close, Wes. Of course, here we say tradesmen too, or home services, but tradies, I like that better. It's more poetic, got a better ring to it.
Yeah,
Well, was this, I know that and I won't say the word because I think it gets less of an audience on YouTube, but back a few years ago when we had that big sickness that was all over the planet, home services exploded because everybody was stuck at home. They couldn't go anywhere. I had the misfortune of trying to replace one singular piece of tile, and I was going around to all these tile shops, and they were packed. I mean, they were packed like they were giving tile away for free, but people were sitting there at home looking at the same ugly floor that's been there for 15 years.
yeah,
And people went crazy and started spending money. But I was just told by an insider the other day that's involved in home services. He doesn't do the same thing you do, Wes, but similar. So he's seeing the numbers and he's saying, man, I'm now seeing another big wave, a rise in home services, at least in the US. And I think it's because nobody can sell their home. So once again, they're stuck in their home. So are you seeing any trends like that
right.
where they say home services, they said, if you know anybody looking to get into a growing industry, they said home services is really going wild right now.
Yeah, I think so. And it feels to me like a lot are pivoting toward repairing and restoring what they already have. And that's probably due to a number of reasons, but certainly right now, building materials, the costs in different, probably globally, it's impacted differently in different places, but the materials need to come from somewhere and they need to be shipped. Even locally, they need to be shipped, and that uses diesel typically. So the costs are expected to go through the roof. They already are in Australia. And so what that means is potentially fixing things, you know, repairing things. There's less material cost and more labor cost potentially. Yeah, we saw that as well in that crazy time you mentioned. We we're in Victoria, Australia, which was the most heavy-handed scenarios
Oh, I
here. So
see.
we saw the worst of it of Australia, and there's so many things you couldn't do, but maintenance related tasks were acceptable. So, everyone who was building larger projects all of a sudden needed to adjust their websites, and that's what we do, but to adjust their messaging for the short term to make continue to operate. So that flexibility, as everyone is using the word pivot, everyone is pivoting towards that. And I think some people just stayed there to a degree, stayed there in the more maintenance related tasks because they saw the profit in there.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, it's almost like when you're buying in quantity. So you buy in quantity, you get a very low unit cost. But if you want to make profit, I remember my father smoked when he was a kid, and he said he could go to the store back then, and they would break a pack, and you could buy two or three or four cigarettes, of course, at a big premium. But it's always better to sell those smaller jobs. I think the profit. It's tougher though, I would say, to manage those jobs because now you've got a lot of staff and doing these versus everybody being on one big work project that's $500,000. And, so I think it's a little tougher to manage. But what pivot are you
Yeah.
seeing now in 2026? Because I know, again, in the US, we've got a lot of value shoppers. Everybody's looking for a deal. They're the luxury part of of all markets don't change because the rich usually stay rich. But as far
Yes.
as the middle class people getting stuff repaired, I'm hearing they're moving towards value. What are you advising to
Yeah.
your clients to make
Yeah,
sure
it's
they're
interesting. So we've got a few custom builders who are on the probably more the luxury end of things, but they are just starting to be hit, it feels like. So um, it depends again where you are in the world, but it feels as though there's a greater divide between the rich and the poor, and that middle ground is a no man's land. So you really got to figure out who you're trying to serve, and if you want to go all in a certain way, it's probably better than just sort of floundering in the middle. I believe. So we've seen some clients really double down on the luxury market and do incredibly well. And so they might be winning less jobs, but they're better. As you say, it's easier to manage a few large jobs because less people are involved and less things can go potentially wrong. So I think that divide will continue. So you've really got to pick your niche and pick your lane and figure out what's going to be most beneficial in the short term, as because you've got to keep the cash flow going, but the long term as well. And to move the for a long time, people were pushed, I think, into um, professional services, going to university, all that kind of stuff. But there's that big risk of AI wiping out a lot of that kind of stuff. So we're seeing a lot of people thinking about, hey, maybe I should get on the tools. And it must be so rewarding. I'm not on the tools myself, but to see something physically built by your hands at the end of the day, I think there's human nature in feeling a sense of satisfaction in that. I wonder if we see a lot of um, uh, depression and all that. I mean, I'm no expert and I'm just spitball some ideas, but I wonder if it's because we don't physically build anything anymore with our hands and we don't see the fruit of our labor. Maybe that's a part of it.
And look what happened when we were all locked in the houses. People started painting because you can, at the end of the day, you can say, I painted that. People became musicians. They
Yeah.
got guitars out. They started singing because in crafts, in crafts, you're producing a product. And yeah, there's something fundamental. I can't speak for everybody, but I do know that a lot of men, but particularly myself, I like a job that I can look back and say, hey, I did that. I completed that. This we built
Yeah.
that wall, we built that house. There's a satisfaction in having a physical something done, and that's some of that is going away. But I'm glad you brought this up because I had a question on here. I wasn't sure whether to ask or not, but I think you paved the road for me perfectly. I recently had a friend of mine reach out to me. He's a good entrepreneur. He's very solid, very knowledgeable, and he's got a son who's just about college age. And he says, Robert, I'm really struggling whether to send him off to college or not. And I said, well, what's he
Mm.
interested in? What do you want him to do? And he says, well, I really just want him to be an entrepreneur. And I said, well, don't bother with college. If he doesn't need that degree, like you got to go to college to be a doctor, to get a CPA, to be an attorney. It requires university. I
Yeah.
said, but you've already armed him because he's an entrepreneur. The son's gotten to see a lot of things. I said, either get him in your business. I said, but better yet, because sometimes people don't listen to dad. I say, have him
Yeah.
go intern at another. So do you also feel that way? Because I know that I don't feel that university is the pathway that it used to be. So how would you answer that question? Would you send him off to
Yeah.
university or have him, get his hands dirty?
Yeah, I think getting your hands dirty is the way to go at this stage. I mean, as you say, there's certain professions that you need a high level of skill and understanding. I don't want a brain surgeon who's just learnt on the fly if I need brain surgery. But yeah, for the most part, and certainly entrepreneurial endeavors, you know, learning from mentors is always the way to go. So if you can get yourself in a fantastic company, and not that you'll necessarily do the same type of business as what they are doing, but you'll learn the way of thinking, which I don't know that you could learn that in a course. I think you can only learn that by observation, having that creative spirit to motivate you. I love work. We work with mostly founder-led businesses, so none of us are formally trained in business. We had a skill set, we took it to market, and we figured out all the other stuff, ironed out the rough edges in our understanding, and figured out a way forward. So I think I really enjoy working with those types of people and visionary people, and we find our way forward once we've got a vision for the future. It's really exciting.
Well, I'm pretty excited to find out that you wrote a book as well. I'm an author. I love hosting authors because that's a real commitment of time. I mean,
Yeah.
somebody said the other day they got their book out pretty quick, and I thought, I'm sure it probably took a little bit longer. At least they were probably thinking about that for years before they actually committed it, and it's a lifetime of experience. But yours is the Simple Manifesto: marketing principles to save you time, increase profit, and create your dreams in a snap. I love that
Yeah,
title.
yeah.
So when did you first think I need to get this down on paper?
It was a suggestion by somebody. I'd been blogging for a number of years, and they just suggested, "Hey, you've got so many great ideas. You should collate some of them into a book." So that was kind of the starting point. It's a whole lot different to writing a blog. It's just a short piece, so it's kind of easy. But when you're trying to collate a whole bunch of ideas into one volume, one piece, it's more difficult. But I really enjoyed the process, and it was before AI. I wrote it before AI, so it's my fingers that punch those letters into the keyboard.
100%
Mistakes
certified
and all.
beef. Sorry, go ahead.
What's what's that? Sorry.
100% certified beef. You had, like we say in the US, certified beef. It's 100% real,
Oh yeah.
the real thing.
Yeah, it's the real deal. And that's why there's probably some spelling errors and some grammar, issues. But I really enjoyed the process. And it helped me even distill down my own thinking as well into logical, because you have so many understandings of what you've learned a lot the hard way. And they're great stories, but to distill down what it actually means so you can communicate it to someone else, it's really helpful just to learn, but also, it's always great. It's kind of like building something. It's a physical, tangible book. Something curious, and I don't know if you've seen it. For years, it was more ebooks sold than the physical, but just, probably the last 12, 18 months, it's more physical. See the sales reports come in, and it's a curious thing. I wonder if there's a desire for the physical and the tangible and the substance. And I think, I mean, if I'm reading something and if it's paper based, I read it in a different way than if it was an ebook on, an iPad or something like that. So yeah, it's just a curious thing that I've observed, and I wonder if there's a push for the tangible and the hands-on thing going on right now.
If you don't mind, Wes, I'll speculate because I spend a lot of time reading about publishing because I'm concerned, is AI going to do X, Y, and Z? And AI has already changed a lot about publishing. Traditional publishing is dead. Pretty much dead. I always tell people just get your book out, publish it independently, get it on Amazon, which is not that hard between KDP, and I even tell them to do an audiobook, I highly recommend. And then even to have it translated, if it's a business book, it usually does very
Yeah.
well in Spanish. And even the German market, believe it or not, people think, oh, well, Germany's a small, believe it or not, they eat up business books. So sometimes if you've got a presence, which you're also a podcaster, so if you have an audience that's already starting to build in German, there's a lot of people doing in German. But as far as people going to the paperback, I think you're seeing two phenomenon happening simultaneously. One is we don't own anything anymore. We don't hardly own. I know most people are renting their phones, which is insane. We don't own our software anymore. We're essentially renting that. Car leases are 3 times higher than they were, I think, 30 years ago. And we don't own our music or anything. So people are going for that physical book because we're losing this ownership in society. So I think there's a hunger to have that. And then the second thing, for those of us in the business market, because my book is very nuts and bolts. It works
Yeah.
very well as a print book. It's decent as a audio book and a Kindle too, but there's reference material in there and there's parts where you can fill things out. So having both. So I would in both versions of the book, I suggest to get the other version of the book. Why
Yeah.
sell one book when you can sell two? But that might
Yeah.
be. I'm just speculating, Wes. But let's get to your podcast. Now that's built, trusted, chosen. Um,
Yeah.
was that the original title, and it's been the same the whole time, or did you go through some
Yeah,
transition?
I only launched it this year. I actually had another working title, but then I realized someone else was podcasting with that name, just a small podcast of theirs. So luckily I bumped into it before I launched. But yeah, so built, trusted, chosen. So I really do feel as though the role of marketing is to create trust these days because it feels as though trust is being eroded. We don't necessarily believe what we read or what we see. We can't believe that even the videos of, famous people, they look realistic. So there's that erosion of trust simply because AI can do so many things. So how do we create trust? Because that's the foundation of being chosen as a business. How do we amplify those trust signals so people will want to do business with us? But most of our clients, they're not selling a impulse buy widget. If you're selling a cheap widget, you can sell that online. It's $10, whatever it is. Buy it on Temu. Um, but if you're selling something of a higher value, I mean, imagine if you're buying a custom home, let's say, you're not going to just buy that online. You're going to want to talk to a human.
That's
So
right.
you're going to want a high level of trust, particularly in with everything going on. I mean, in Australia, we've seen a lot of builders go out of business for a whole lot of reasons. Some of the things you touched on earlier caused a lot of grief, and but there's new things popping up all the time. So if you're choosing someone to work in your home, even as home services, you want to trust them because they're coming into your home. You may not be there. You don't know what they're going to do. You don't know if they're leaving it in a clean state, all that kind of stuff. So building trust is so huge these days from a marketing standpoint. That's what we focus on as
Sure.
as a business, just because it suits our clientele really well. So yeah, that's what the podcast is about, and it's about gleaning ideas of what it means to other businesses. Businesses, people in the trenches doing the work, learning the hard way. All those sort of storytelling always works really well, and everyone's got a story once you start prodding them a little bit. They've got a story to tell, and I find it really interesting. Just from if I was the only listener of the podcast, it would be wonderful. But it's good that other people are tuning in as well.
Wes, I wanted to ask you, as far as getting right back to trust that you mentioned. I've been on a couple of websites this week that were they weren't part of email capture. They were essentially, we'd call it, I guess, it's like a sales funnel, not necessarily a click
Yeah,
funnel, but the website's sole purpose is to get somebody to spend some money, which I understand. And
yeah,
sometimes for fun, I go through that process as you do too, so you can get that user experience and evaluate what's really happening. The part that really shocks me, Wes, is and if I know the person behind the website, I'll actually write them, and because this is a pet peeve of mine, I'll say, "Where's your face? Where's your face on here? I want to do business
mm,
with a face, with a human being." I said, "You don't have a." I said, "You got a 15-person staff in Seattle, for instance. The person that hears this is going to know who I'm talking about." I said, "You got these wonderful people, this great team. There's not a photo of anybody on there." The person who answers
yeah.
the phone, the person's put your face out there. Like, come on, and I think the easiest thing, and push back if I'm wrong, Wes, the easiest thing you could do to build trust is show them your face.
Yeah, 100%. There's the human connection. It's the equivalent of the physical book, isn't it? It's something of substance. And so we naturally will relate to another person. And also the other thing too, a lot of the founder-led businesses, they might be a couple-led business realistically, but
Mhm.
generalizing, one of the couple will be on the tools and one will be more office related, running the books and making sure all the staff are doing what they need to do, just running the business. But that person behind the scenes stays behind the scenes. But there's a massive benefit of having their photograph on the website as well, because a lot of the buyers may relate better. The decision maker, so let's say it's a custom home build, a lot of the decision makers might relate better to the photograph they see of the person running the behind the scenes stuff. So it's just that natural tendency to relate to certain people that are similar somewhat to us. So it's just a huge win that you can make so quickly and easily by having the photograph and profile of the person, all the people, the key players, even though they're behind the scenes. I think featuring them is a really big win.
And keeping the service experience, excuse me, keeping the service experience consistent. So the website sh should exude a certain presence that when that sets out the expectation when you do talk to somebody on the phone, that
Yeah.
that mood and that vibe of that website needs to be communicated through the phone. And something we joke about, friends of mine, where we talk about home services, is the first guy comes to the, if it's a man, it could be a woman, first person that comes to your house, they've got a fantastic car that's polished, everything's beautiful. They're dressed to the nine. They look like $1 million. You sign that contract, and then a week later the work starts, and it's a van that looks like it came from the scrap yard. It's whoa, and there's a real inconsistency in the delivery
Yeah.
of that experience. Now I realize that's outside of your purview in the service that you offer, but I'm just merely comparing it to every bit of that customer's experience should be consistent. So if you're promising quality on your website, you have to deliver that at every step of the process. So when you get these people that want to work with you, are they already knowledgeable and you're just moving them a few notches? Or are you finding yourself in education mode first and then get them to the right product?
Yeah, that authenticity that you speak of when there's a lack of consistency, it just create, and you're not quite sure why, but something just feels off, and it's exactly what you say. It doesn't feel like the same experience that you had earlier on, whether it be on the website or the salesperson who was a slick operator, and then you get the guys on the tools who may not be. So that just being authentically who you are in the marketplace and having that consistency of the culture, setting the expectations so that they have that same experience each and every time. And that's not to say every time every business needs to be that polished professional. Look, I've got a client who's quite the opposite. He's a really rugged individual, and his language and the whole bit is a different kind of person. But the clientele he serves, he's a more of a business to business operator. He works in a truck. Um, and so the people he talks to and relates to, they're kind of like that as well. So it's totally suitable. So it would be foolish of us to build a website presenting him as some sort of slick businessman in a suit. He's not that at all. It's the sentences are quite short, he's abrupt, but he delivers on his promises. He does a great job, and he'll resonate with his target market. So we just have to make sure that that message is clear, in the consistency, as you say. So sometimes you want to polish everything up to perfection, but that's not really who they are. So you don't want to do that to erode the authenticity. You've got to get that balance right. So it's incredibly important, and a good point you make in the questioning, which is interesting.
Well, it's just like a
Yeah,
movie. We've all been to a movie where we saw the trailer at home on TV, and then we got through the movie and we were like, "What did we just watch?" Because the trailer, I thought it was a thriller and it was sci-fi, or you feel
yeah,
a bit duped by it. But what do you
yeah.
think is as far as the culture of sales inside of a company? And I know you're providing a marketing service, but when you get into education mode and you have to start, because I know there are cases sometimes where you find yourself in a position of a consultant, maybe a little deeper into their business than you expected. something that I preach is that there needs to be a culture of sales. So anybody who touches any email or any phone needs to be cognizant of the fact that this is a sales organization. It's the blood that flows through the body, and it and it has to flow. So
Yeah.
everybody has to be somewhat savvy in delivering the sales experience and moving them either up a value, depending on their structure, up a value ladder, or to to ring the cash register, so to speak. Do you find yourself giving advice in that regard? And if so, what are you counseling them on?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the true value of any service provider is that consultation type, consultative sort of selling as well. So particularly in the services that we do and for the clients for the most part, to have that consultative approach, that you're continually trying to provide value because realistically, there's just so many options who can do the technical piece. And so what's going to make you stand out above everybody else? Well, it's that additional level of advice and insight that only you can bring because you've got a wealth of knowledge and you've considered their scenario. And sometimes that means turning them away from one sort of strategy. So sometimes, let's say someone comes and they realize they need more business flowing through the door, so they'll want to jump on some form of ads. It might be Google ads, let's say, but we realize it's probably not going to be the most effective for them. So you're kind of turning away a chunk of work because they already got their heart set on spending this money on doing the ads, but we know it's not going to work. So you kind of got to think about the long term because you could do the work, extract the money out of them, and they get a horrible outcome, and then that'll come back to you in the long run. So you've got to think about the long term play and think about what's in their best interest and become that um, you know trusted advisor really. So it's for me thinking about being an advisor, making recommendations on what I feel is best because we're so niched and specific. We have a really good understanding of what's going to work straight out of the block, so you can get the results a little bit faster than if you were through a generalist kind of agency.
Who's the perfect client for you, Wes? And by that, I don't mean because I find a lot of entrepreneurs off camera when they'll admit it to me. There's their favorite kind of client because they're fun or there's something about it that's more enjoyable. And then there's the client that they can really make the most impact. They can really move the business needle. So in that second instance, what is the perfect client for you where you're like, I can get them some quick wins. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit, and we can just really wow them out right out of the gate. Is it a particular
Yeah.
type of service or a structure you look for?
Yeah, there's often lots of opportunity in a slightly larger company. So if a good clue for us is if they've got a marketing manager or at least someone responsible for marketing who's not the founder, it means at least they're somewhat invested in the concept of marketing. And someone working within a company, they've got a limited they've got a general knowledge of a lot of things. So coming alongside those marketing people within an organization is powerful because we can do lots that they can't do and we can make them look great. So it changes the way in which we're working. That the goal is to make the marketing manager look awesome to their boss, um, which I really enjoy. So it's that supportive role behind, almost behind the scenes. But the cool part about that is when you get those types of marketing managers, they'll be within a company for a couple of years, and because they love the work you do, you follow them around every company they work in, and they'll typically go to a slightly better role each and every time they're working
Right.
through their career path. So you kind of follow them to the next place, and it'll usually be a similar industry and similar pathway. So follow them, but also maintain the old client, where they've come from, and build the relationship in with the new person filling that role. So that's always been a cool part of what we do. Once we see that there's a marketing manager doing some stuff, and normally there's some things that they could do better, and it's not that they're doing a bad job. It's just that that's not their role to get their hands right into the website, let's say, and so on. So yeah, that's the ideal for us. It's
Great. And that makes me think too that since you have an ideal client, there's also a client on the other side that you may have to turn away. So people think of the sales funnel as you just dump as many suspects or prospects, depending on where they are in the project. Just dump as many in the funnel as possible. But I always think of the beginning of that sales funnel as there should be a filter on it. If you're,
Yeah.
I'm always terrible at giving examples on the spot, but there are just certain fits. If you're 4 foot tall, you're not going to be a basketball player, star basketball player in the NBA. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
There's that's just reality. So there's certain businesses, even yours, for instance. I'm
Yeah.
sure during discovery calls, you're trying to see if you can really move the needle because clearly earlier your ability to turn away business and tell them something's not a fit shows that you have a high degree of integrity. So I'm sure that you're spreading that to these
Yeah.
other companies too, saying, look, we don't need the front end wide open. We need to put a filter on it if they don't fit
Yeah.
this criteria because you're just wasting your sales team's time.
Yeah. So the filter for us in those scenarios, it's typically when it's a founder business, it's a small business, might be, just a few people, let's say, and the founder is just so busy that they can't really even spend time with that first introductory call. So if they're reluctant to even jump on a 45-minute Zoom call to start the potential of working together, they just can't find the time. It means a couple of things. Usually, it means they haven't got the resources to work with us to get the job done in a streamlined manner, so we can produce great outcomes. And they're probably already booked solid, so they don't really need us. They have no intention to grow because they're not building their company in a manner in which it's set up for growth. It's built and it's all solely dependent on the founder. So it's got a limited capacity already. So they don't really need us because they're already booked solid. So those kind of jobs, um, they sort of that filter you speak of. If we can't get them on the call, or if they book and then just never show up, and then they don't show up again, well, that's it. They haven't. They're probably not going to ever. We're probably never going to produce great outcomes for them, and we're going to be frustrated. They're going to be frustrated. It's best not to take on those jobs. On the flip side, sometimes there is a small business like that, and the founder just trusts you. He says, "Go away and do it," and he just ticks off on everything, and that's fine too. But he'll typically show up for the Zoom call, and you can kind of set. It's kind of you got to understand people, but he kind of shows up and he expresses things of that nature. The call is usually pretty short. But you can kind of sense, yeah, this guy is going to just trust in what you do because he knows you do what you do really well. He's probably heard through word of mouth or something, and you can do it. So it's kind of tricky in that you can't just turn away those tiny clients because it's about the mindset of the person that you're working with. Um, yeah,
And that shows the power of the referral and the testimonial. Those are
yeah,
the people that will kind of come to your door and say, "Look, just can you fix it?" And of course, you as running the company, you have to be careful too that they're not abdicating everything to you because those are the people that are problematic and will complain later. So they need to understand the
yeah,
structure, the promises, and what they need to do, and what you need to do. Like when we work with contract law, the binding contract requires behaviors of both parties. So that's really important to have that understood.
yeah,
But I
yeah.
wanted
That's
to,
true.
I apologize.
Yeah,
Wes, go
yeah.
ahead.
And I go,
I was going to say, since you're also the number one guy at Uplift 360, you also, because you run a podcast, you've written a book, you show up on, if anybody goes to YouTube and looks your name up, you've been on a bunch of podcasts, which is always great to see because it helps me do more research to have you on as a guest. That's my secret for people that don't know. We're both alumni of Podmatch, so yes, I looked at your bio on there, and I looked at your social media, which is great. But Wes, I think the secret weapon for me personally as a podcaster is I just watch your other interviews, particularly the second
yeah,
half when you guys really get into it, and it gives me the rhythm of what you like to talk about. I can tell what you're getting excited about. So I just, I kind of that's my secret. So for anybody wanting to be a podcaster, but my question to you, obviously, are you also suggesting to some of these founders, hey, get on some podcasts, show your face, which is what I always say.
yeah. I think that's the big play right now to build leverage your personal brand.
Mhm.
So it's the quickest and easiest way to build reputation and authority because it's leveraging your own person and people know you out in the community that you serve. So that's the quickest and easiest way. Now, there's always pros and cons with any strategy. The
Mhm.
downside is potentially it will make your company less sellable if it's too dependent on you.
True.
But but you've got to figure out building systems and processes that are not dependent on you, but you are the brand. And if you do have an exit in mind, which I don't have one for any short term, like it's not on the radar, but eventually one day it'll be a time where I've got to start considering backing out of the podcast a little bit and start building the company brand more so than my own personal brand. But personal branding is just so quick and easy to get really solid runs really fast, and that's why I'm all over that. And I enjoy it. I enjoy podcasting. It gets me up early in the morning, and I love it. You know, I'll be up sometimes 4 o'clock in the morning because we're on the other side of the planet for a lot of
That's
podcasters.
right.
So because I love it so much, if you can find something that really invigorates you and excites you and motivates you, it's easy to do the extra hours and the funny times. But if it doesn't energize you, you'll really find podcasting a hard slog. So for those that are prepared to put in the time and prepared to make mistakes and look silly, because as you're starting out, you're just so self-conscious that you're going to say something silly, and you feel fraudulent sometimes because who am I? I'm just running a little business here in Australia. Who am I speaking to? People who are, podcasts that are, recognized and that kind of stuff. You feel kind of awkward in the initial phases, but you work through that and you learn and you mature and you get better at it.
I can't speak for anybody else, Wes, but it took me about 18 months. And I shot an interview every week for the first year. I made a commitment and I delivered one interview every week for 52 weeks. And then we took a short break and then continued. But it wasn't really until about the 18-month mark that I felt like I was in any kind of rhythm at all. I changed the way I asked questions and realized that what I'm interested in may not be what the YouTube audience is interested in. So I started thinking about what the watcher is interested in, what energizes the
Yeah.
guest. Because if I can get you excited, they get excited, and so I try to come in and bring high energy and find wonderful guests like you. Podmatch makes it easy. I have to say that Alex and Alicia Sanfilippo from Podmatch have got an amazing. As soon as I signed up on there, one, I don't have to scrape around looking for wonderful guests anymore, and number two, that website is huge. I mean, there is so much to learn, and their educational system in there made me a much better podcaster. They made me think about things that I had never even considered before. So I don't. The only thing I say to Alex, I've emailed him a couple of times. I said, I don't know how you get away with selling this service this cheap, because if you utilize everything that Podmatch has available, it's quite vast for a relatively small amount of money compared to the other stuff that you and I pay for as podcasters. So it's a deal.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The cost is next to nothing, and yeah, you're right. How are they making it? I suppose the volume of members, that's how they make the money. But it is such a low price point, which is wonderful. Um, yeah, I've referred a few people on. For us, as I said, in Australia, friends and so on, I've referred. They've just found it difficult with the timing because most people aren't here in Australia. But as I said, if you enjoy it and love it enough, you'll get up early and do it.
That's right. Well, most of the successful people I know are early risers. There is something true to that. I don't make my bed in the morning, although I was in the army for 8 years. I don't see any utility in it, but I do like to wake up early. Now, other than sending them to uplift360.com.au, we've already got your link to your book on Amazon inside the description as well. Any other way you want people to connect with you?
Yeah, I'm really active on LinkedIn is probably the primary social media platform. And I know not everyone will connect with people they don't know, but I will. So just put in a connection request and that's fine. On the website, you can book a strategy call with me as well. So it's free, big button on the homepage, as you would expect. And book that time. I've opened up the calendar pretty wide, so
Oh,
people should
great.
find a time space, that suits their. And if people do jump on the website, they will notice that there's global brands mentioned there, brands that they probably might recognize as well. So
I love it, Wes.
yeah,
Was there any questions you wish I had asked? Anything you wish I had covered here in the wrap up?
yeah, that's always a great question. I sometimes ask the same thing of guests. It is curious. I want to say probably just the fear around AI, even in practical hands-on roles, people are starting to wonder, what's this all going to mean? Um, and I would say just start if you haven't started yet, just make a start, just so you understand what the tools are capable of. Don't start to roll them into your business right away if you're just dipping your toes in the water. But and the best tip I could give you with using any of the AI platforms, and let's say ChatGPT, because that's probably
Sure.
the most common, is to think about using your voice as opposed to typing. Even if you're doing it on your PC, use the little microphone thing and speak, because it just covers so much more depth of what you're
That's
thinking
right.
about at that time than if you were to type things out. And you think in a slightly different way when you're speaking through concepts. So think about the tools you're using, your phone and also your PC, and using the voice as a way of interacting with it. And you'll soon, by doing so, you'll soon figure out its application and what you might be able to leverage into your own business as
I
well.
I think OpenAI's voice capability, which here in the US we have to pay for, but it's only $20 a month. I think
Yeah.
it's an investment for my podcast. I call her Eva. She's, believe it or not, she's got an Aussie accent and her name is Eva. I'm not
Oh,
making this up.
nice.
And I was talking to her earlier today because I had some updates with the business and of course the paid version, she memorizes things. So I was, having a discussion with her in my little Apple AirPods and on my, morning walk. And I think it's fantastic because, like you said, being able to talk reduces a lot of idea friction because your hands are
Yeah.
moving, it's tactile, and that's nice sometimes too to get an idea down. But when you're talking to AI, voice is so much faster because it's almost at the speed of thought, just slightly slower. The hands really increase the drag on that. So if you don't mind, Wes, thank you so much for coming on. I'm going to end the stream and we'll do a very quick wrap up on Zoom.
Awesome.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'll end the stream here on YouTube. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate you dropping in. And believe it or not, Wes, we did have viewers here on a